The first scream on the recording is not a scream at all. It is breath, ragged and metallic, snatched through what sounds like a fist over a telephone receiver. Then a voice, high and breaking, says the same word over and over again. Help! 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 The dispatcher answers with the patience of a nurse soothing a fevered child. 911. What is your emergency? Another breath. And then what all of us who have heard the tape remember, the overlapping clamor of radios, the low throb of engines idling, and in the background a muffled command that carries the finality of a slammed door. Turn around. Get back in your vehicles. You are not authorized to enter. We never learned the caller's name. By the time the sheriff's deputies, firefighters, and the local news van knifed their way down the hard-packed road into that pocket of White County, Tennessee, there was a steel gate across the drive and a security detail in dark uniforms we would later learn were hired by someone very rich and very careful. The cameras caught the smoke first, lazy and gray against a cardboard February sky. Then they caught the moment a young reporter, hair whipped into her glossy lipstick by a hand-me-down wind, shuffled backward while a grim man with a rifle ordered her into her van. It was February 8th, 2004. The place past the gate had a name that sounded made up because it was. It had tidy streets and white picket fences because somebody thought that would be a comfort to the families they were luring to a small town built by money and ambition in the middle of nowhere. There were 2 diners, a hardware store with a false antique sign, a little movie theater with a marquee that still promised a matinee that would never play. It was a research community, they said, a place for world-class study of the human brain, a place where work and family could coexist for the betterment of the world. 3 days after that first 911 call, the security detail drove away without a goodbye. They left the gate open like a mouth that had forgotten itself. The camera crews were still there. The firefighters and deputies were still there. In the end, the only ones allowed inside were the pigeons and the weeds and the few remaining strays who slipped through the gate like a dare. They found houses filled with clothes and junk mail and half-finished school projects. They found a stake driven into the ground behind the research center. It's blackened with still stinking faintly of old fire. They found nothing else. No bodies. No notes. No food left out to spoil. The number was 327. Men, women, children. Every single one. If the tape recorder catches one person praying that day, it catches another cursing. Those tapes have been played on the air so many times that even the pauses have grooves. The reporter's voice wobbles as she asks who is in charge and where they can find someone to speak on record. She is told to get back in her van. She says sorry into the camera while the cameraman keeps the lens steady and hard, the way experience taught him to be whenever a story threatened to run away from him. It is a funny thing about vanished people. It is not just the bodies that vanish. It is the institutions that should be able to account for them. The gate is not the only thing left standing open. The lines of responsibility open too. The forms and filings that would tell you who is obligated to explain. You end up with an empty town and a stack of questions that weigh more than any human being should have to lift. My name is Nora Keene, and I have been lifting those questions for a very long time. I was 17 that winter. I watched it unfold on a flickering television in the living room of the little ranch house where my mother used to iron on Sunday nights. Her eyes on the news, her hands never missing the seams. The town that vanished was 2 counties over from the place where my father was born. The man whose name floated through our family like a rumor had taken a job there that summer. My mother did not like to talk about him, and when she did it was with the careful past tense of a person who locks the window every night even though she knows nobody is climbing in. He was my father's brother, an uncle I had met only once, back when I was an infant and everything smelled like milk. He was a neuroscientist, which sounded to me then like a word for wizards who worked under fluorescent lights. I know now that what it mostly means is grants and labs and the mildly nauseating coffee in the break rooms of institutions that do not believe in windows. He was one of the 327. We have a picture of him on the mantle. He is wearing a suit a little too shiny for the camera flash. He is holding a paper plate at a family reunion in a park somewhere. If I were the kind of person who believed photographs could talk, I would say he is trying to tell me he never expected any of this. For a long time I thought I would be a nurse. Then I watched a father fall to his knees against a steel gate on the evening news. His hands in his hair, and his mouth open on a word that never made it to air. And something shifted. I did not want to bandage wounds. I wanted to ask why there were wounds at all. I wanted to stand where the gate had been and tell people exactly what I saw. So I became a reporter. Not a glamorous one. The work is mostly taking notes in courtrooms that smell like old linoleum and waiting on hold. The work is reading public records until your eyes feel like they would appreciate a new career. But the work is also being the first person to hear the way one detail sticks out of the story like a loose nail. And if you are fortunate, the work is being the last person someone calls when they are ready to tell the truth. Before that happened, I did what reporters do. I went where the money went. The town had a corporate owner. A private company with a mildly inspirational name, Roroa Holdings. The sort of name you could staple to anything. The filings said it was held by a single man. He used to be the kind of figure who smiled out from magazine covers about the future. Calder Wexler had started in telecommunications back when we still called long distance. He bought and sold content before we called it content. He had the look of a person aware of the camera from birth. He bankrolled the town like a man who believed he could build a softer version of utopia from poured concrete and good intentions. Ask around, and you will get a catalog of opinions about Wexler. Almost all of them delivered in the same resigned tone people reserve for weather. The biographer he handpicked while his star was ascendant told me he had access to everything. Right up until the moment he asked about the town. The biographer's name is Miles Kent. Miles writes what people like Calder Wexler want other people to read about them. He wore an expensive watch that afternoon, but his shirt was missing a button. A combination that seemed to me to summarize his profession better than any philosopher ever could. Calder believed he was changing the species. Miles said he would say that in private with the casualness of a man ordering lunch. He thought the town would prove him right. He thought he had found the one scientist who could take an idea and hammer it into a miracle. The scientist had his own legends. He had worked in Australia before a Fortune 100 airplane touched down on a tarmac there with an offer that smelled like an unrepeatable opportunity. He gave speeches in rooms filled with clever people. And those speeches were always about how we were not as small as we feared. He had a voice that could sell you a room with no windows. He preferred optimism even when pessimism would have saved him trouble. The first time anyone found human remains on the property after the disappearance. They found teeth in the ash at the base of the stake behind the research center. They matched the teeth to the scientist whose optimism had been famous. His name was Dr. Elias Danner. He was 38 when he moved to Tennessee. He was 39 when someone burned him alive. The town has been empty for many years. It remains empty because we told ourselves it would be useful to preserve it as a crime scene. We tell ourselves all kinds of things for that reason. It looks like a movie set now. And in the way America does. A roadside industry has grown up around the mystery. There are people selling bumper stickers and faux-age t-shirts along the Tulane Road that carries you out there. There is a coffee trailer painted to look like a conspiracy corkboard. There are caves in the hills you are not supposed to enter because the ground never forgets. I have walked those streets in every season. In autumn, the leaves stack themselves against the curbs like a drifted red tide. In winter, the wind slides its cold hand under your coat and keeps it there. In summer, the sun bounces off the clapboard in a way that makes you feel at once exposed and alone. I once pressed my nose to the glass of a living room window and saw a pair of tiny sneakers in the corner. Their laces still knotted like fists. It took me a long time to breathe after that. The houses are rotting from the inside out. The architect forgot to add a bit of flashing at the base of the roofs. A small oversight that invited rain into the walls the way a careless word invites a fight. Dry rot is a misnomer. It is born where water lingers. It is tenacious and stupid, which is to say it is a perfect metaphor for what we do to ourselves. I learned as much of this as I could from people who would talk. A local reporter named Terry Holcomb took me out there the first time. Terry is the kind of man who wears good boots and a bad tie. He has been covering the story since the first phone call, and he says he will be covering it after his back refuses to let him climb the hill to the research center anymore. He will tell you, and he is right, that nothing about the construction was secret. The permits, the filings, The token nods to community support. He will tell you, and he is right about this too, that we did not care to look closely until there was smoke. The rumors multiplied. Brain mapping, private medicine, military contractors. The town had been a sponge, and people squeezed it for meaning until their knuckles turned white. The most plausible version of events is this. They built a piece of something they did not understand. And the piece worked in a way they did not expect. And then there was a night that ended with the stake. Everyone wants to know who gave the order to keep the first responders out. There is an interview from 2007 with a contractor named Jake Morrell who says he was told to keep the perimeter and shoot anyone who broke the line. He says he never saw the town from the inside. He says they took shifts, day and night. And then one morning a voice on the phone told them to leave and not look back. He says he was paid in cash and spent the next 18 months answering questions in a facility with a name you will recognize from the news. Jake did not come when I asked to speak with him. A former State Department official confirmed he had indeed been held. And then the official confirmed nothing else and hung up. I asked the people with badges too. A retired FBI agent named Frank Dalrymple took me to coffee and held his cup with both hands. He is a practical man who understands that, practically speaking, you do not make 327 people disappear without a plan. We dusted for everything. He said, we got everything you can get when you think it might tell you what a person ate for breakfast 3 days before they vanished. We got nothing that told us where they went. He scratched the back of his neck like a man trying to dislodge a persistent itch. The only time his voice wavered was when he said he thinks about that steak every time his grandkids ask for a campfire story. I spent months assembling a map of what we knew, which is a fancy way of saying I spent months acknowledging how much we did not. I drafted the first part of a series with a careful, neutral voice. I planned to visit families. I planned to insist that they would not be named if they did not want to be. I planned to ask the questions the rest of us kept in the private drawer in the kitchen where we hide the tools we pretend we do not own. I would like to tell you there is a cinematic way the next part happened, but there was only a phone. The call came late on a Tuesday. The desk light threw a careful circle on the notebook where I had written the same sentence 5 times because none of the endings satisfied me. The ring startled me, and then irritated me, and then by the 3rd ring I realized the number did not have a name attached to it, which is sometimes the best news a reporter gets all week. The voice asked for me by name. The voice was female. The timbre somewhere between late 40s and late 50s. The consonants flattened into the pattern of someone who grew up far from Tennessee and stayed there until the last possible moment. I will not tell you her name. I promised I would not. And some promises are a gate you keep shut even when the town is empty. She said she had lived in the town. She said she had not been alone when she left. She said 3 numbers. 327. She wanted to talk and she wanted me to listen and she wanted none of this to involve anybody else until she finished. She seemed to know exactly how the game is played. People say they want the truth. The thing about the truth is that it comes with blood under its nails. She told me the town had not been built for the public purpose everyone said. That purpose had been correct in the way a rumor is correct when the gist is there, but the details are wrong. They had not been mapping the brain for the satisfaction of a federal grant. They had not been trialing a wonder drug or a surgical device. The project was called Hearth. That was its private name. And I have come to believe that the person who named it must have liked the idea of warmth and light and family and what you can hold in the palm of your hand. The scientist, Dr. Danner, had spent his 20s chasing the same dream many clever people chase, to find the place where thought becomes electricity and to see if electricity can be convinced to become thought. He believed brains were radios that could be tuned. He believed information wanted to travel and that if you could adjust the dial just so, you could carry a whole person across a space without moving anything but a signal. Hearth was not telepathy. Exactly. Hearth was a mesh. A quiet agreement across multiple human brains to share enough to function as one for a short time without damaging any one member. The potential was obscene. A surgical team that never had to speak. A squad that moved like a single hand. A family that never misunderstood each other again. It is not a surprise that the military was interested. It is not a surprise that a billionaire believed he could push his chips to the center of this table and win. She said the mesh worked. 4:67 seconds on a Thursday in October. 9 people in a room felt the same thing at the same time and discovered that the place where we end and other people begin is not as fixed as we pretend. She said they stepped back from that frontier with their hearts pounding and the sick high of new power. She said they reported their results over a scrambled line to a person we have never been able to name. She said the first sign of collapse was a dream that spread through the mesh like smoke. The dream was a field that belonged to no one. The dream was water underground. The dream was a stake in the ground, honest and blank as a post in a cornfield. The dream did not end just because the subjects woke up. After the mesh, they dreamed it, and after the mesh, it dreamed them. I will not pretend to know what happened next better than she did. Though I have seen enough things during my life to know that the worst events are never caused by one failure alone. Pressure warped permissions. Contracts stretched until they made a noise. A team that had been told they were building a better world discovered they were just a good investment. The security apparatus around the town tightened its grip. Wexler vanished into lawyers. Danner marched into the room with the mesh like a soldier who does not know that surrender has already been signed behind his back. On the night of February 8th, someone toggled the mesh without authorization. A dozen participants went in. They were people whose names I could tell you if I wanted to ruin their lives. Some were researchers. Some were spouses. One was a janitor who had learned to run the machines better than the people who hung PhDs on their office walls. The mesh spun up like a pulse. The people in the mesh tasted copper, and then a field, and then water underground, and then the stake. The power surged. The grid flickered. The generator slurred. In the confusion, someone who had been waiting for confusion called the contractors at the gate and told them to hold the line and shoot to kill if anyone crossed into the town. The mesh ran for 9 minutes. When it shut down, 1 person was dead, 3 were bleeding, and the rest were linked enough to know 2 things. They could take the whole town out without another machine. And if they did not, someone else would. The caves under the town were not only for cheap climate control. The caves connected to tunnels built in the early part of the last century when men trusted dynamite more than they trusted God. The researchers had used them to move bulky things without putting them on the road where neighbors could count. The caves would hold people if you had to hold people. The caves would hide them too. She said the decision looked like chaos from the outside. She said that on the inside it felt like the only way to keep what they had done from becoming a monster. The terror was not of a monster that wore a face. The terror was of a monster that slipped into each of ours. The plan came together in half a night under fluorescent lights that hummed like bees. They shut the town down the way you shut down a lab. They told families to pack quietly and quickly. They carried the smallest children out first. They used the mesh and short pulses to manage panic and pain as people bumped along the dark. They stacked food and water in an anteroom under the hill that an engineer had designed for servers and shame. They closed the doors behind them and waited for the rest. Danner did not come. He had started this and believed he was the only one who should stay to end it. He believed if he destroyed the primary array, the mesh would be unusable without the central processor only he understood. He believed he could bargain with the voice on the phone. It is a neat thing to be a man who believes all his life and then to make the one mistake that will outlive you. He went outside. He said something nobody recorded. And someone with a gun who did not live in the town but believed he owned it set a torch to the stake. I know. It sounds like a fever. That is also what history sounds like the first time you hear it. She did not tell me where they went in those tunnels. She did not tell me ration schedules, or routes, or how many people collapsed along the way. She did not tell me how long they stayed before the first group moved on, and the next, and the next. She did not tell me which agencies helped. I know some did. Nobody moves that many people without help. Nobody keeps that many people alive without lying. What she did tell me was this. For a little time the town survived underground. Babies cried, and then hushed against shoulders the way babies do. People went from family to collection and back again. The mesh was used in cautious pulses to help sick people sleep and to teach children they did not have to be afraid of the dark unless the dark had a reason. Some of them decided they could live like that forever. Some of them decided they could not live like that for even one more day. She was in the second group. She left when a door opened she had not expected, and a man in a suit gave her a new name and told her to use it only when someone asked. She left with a boy who was not hers, but who slept better when he laid his head in the bin between her neck and shoulder. She moved to a state where it snows for real and waited tables until she could afford a better life. She did not tell people anything. When she could not sleep, she imagined the field and the steak and made herself a promise. If anybody ever asked her what happened that night, she would tell the truth, but she would pick the person she told. "You can do whatever you like with this," she said. She did not feel like a liar. She felt like a person who had been too quiet for too long. I asked her for proof, and she provided the only kind I believe more than I believe a press conference. She gave me names and dates nobody could have guessed. She gave me phrases from internal Roroa emails that a former assistant confirmed almost word for word after 2 drinks and a long look out my office window. She told me where to look in a filing cabinet that belonged to a low-level employee who had quit in 2004 and had been terrified ever since that someone would knock on her door and ask for the box she could not bring herself to throw away. The emails were coy until suddenly they were not. A schedule, an invoice, a diagram whose lines looked to my untrained eye like a radio tower turned inside out. I do not want to pretend that publishing the story healed much. It did not. Some of the people who came up out of the tunnels are living quiet lives under quiet names and want to keep it that way. Some are dead. A very small number have risked exposure to reconnect with people who love them enough to wait a decade without proof. Most of the families who sat at their kitchen tables and looked for meaning in the pattern of their wood grain did not get the ending they deserved. If I could write a different world for them, I would. I am only one person. I am only a reporter. The job is not to write different worlds. The job is to describe this one until someone else realizes they have to build a better one. There were consequences for people with better suits than ours. The Department of Justice indicted 2 executives at Roroa Holdings on charges that sound like accountants arguing and carry mandatory minimums that would break your heart. One of them took a plea. One of them did not. Calder Wexler is under house arrest in a home where the glass is thicker than a war story. He refuses to concede even the possibility that his vision led to a criminal act. He has the posture of a man who believes good intentions are an answer you can paste over an outcome. When I asked him if he thought 327 people belonged to him just because his checkbook had their names at the start of the story, he blinked at me slow, as if I had asked him to explain why air is important. "Nora," he said, "some of us have responsibilities you do not understand." It is not clear that this interview benefited him. The federal government swallowed its shame and paid damages after families sued. The amount will never be enough. The military wrote 3 separate reports about what it did not do and why, which is exactly the number of reports you write when you are trying to make sure you can place the blame wherever the cameras are not pointing. A congressional committee held hearings that produced redacted passages I now know by heart. Some of the redactions hide sources. Some hide the fact that somebody powerful did not want us to know that power accompanied money into that town and out the other side. I went back to the stake once after the story was out. They have fenced it off now, which is what you do to history when you have finally decided it needs a plaque. The wood is darker than it was the first time I stood there. The ground around it is still stubborn in the way ground occasionally is when bad things have happened nearby. Frank Dalrymple came with me and carried a thermos like an offering. We poured coffee into paper cups and stood with our hands jammed into our coats and listened to nothing. We tried, I think, to hear what the town would say to us if it were still capable of speech. I told Frank about the mesh dream, the field, the water, the stake. He listened the way men who spend a lifetime listening to lies listen when they are offered a plausible truth. Then he nodded. Once. "It is not right," he said, "to burn a man like that, even if he built the thing that made it possible. It is not right to keep first responders away. It is not right to call people citizens one day and assets the next because you think the word gives you an authority you did not earn." He did not sound like a lawman or a poet. He sounded like a person. For a long time after, I dreamed of people walking under the ground. They walked in lines with their fingers at each other's elbows. They walked with their mouths open to take whatever air was offered. They walked with their chins up when a tunnel opened, and someone with a badge they did not recognize handed them a new life like a used coat. Sometimes in the dream they would reach me and ask me to carry a child. Sometimes they would leave me behind because they did not trust me to keep up. I never took it personally. Some work is yours to do. Some work is not. The woman who called me still lives under the name she was given. She works in a bookstore that smells like cinnamon. The boy she carried out of the dark is a man now, working nights in a hospital laundry where the sheets are so white they make your teeth ache. She does not regret leaving the town, though she misses certain people with a steadiness that would undo a less disciplined person. She told me once over a burner phone that she keeps a box under her bed with a handful of artifacts. A note a child wrote on school paper. A map of the tunnels sketched in pencil and erased until the paper went thin. A stone she picked up the day they stepped into daylight and were met by a man with a piece of paper that made their lives official in a way that always felt like a trick. I have asked her to tell her story publicly. She says that day will come, and I have learned to believe her. She is in no hurry because her life contains enough now that she does not have to feed on the past to feel alive. That is as close to peace as anyone in this story gets. People like to say we are a nation that keeps moving. The interstate is our sacrament. The on-ramp is our invitation. That sounds nice until you remember what we willingly drive past. We like to say only the future matters, as if the present were not built on a ledger of unpaid debts. What happened in that town is a way of telling ourselves the truth about who we are. We are inventive. We are credulous. We are hungry enough to swallow what we should spit out. We are brave enough to do the thing we will later insist we were forced to do. I stand in front of a camera now and then and try to summarize all this in a minute 30. The producer tells me to hit the beats people expect. Mystery. Money. Government. Redemption if I can find it. I do as I am asked because I like my job and because some stories require a steady hand. Then I go home and sit at my kitchen table. The wood grain runs in long waves. It looks like a topographical map for a place I have never been. I think about 327 names I cannot say aloud. I think about a man with a match. I think about a woman in a cave who decides to go on living. I think about the difference between intent and responsibility, which is a difference that people with money sometimes like to pretend is small. I think about my uncle in the shiny suit photograph and hope he got the ending he needed. I think about how we measure the distance between one person and another, and whether the mesh was really a violation or just a terrifyingly honest accounting of the ways we are connected already. Here is what I want from you. If you have come this far, do not forgive what does not deserve forgiveness. Do not mistake secrecy for safety. Do not let the next person who says some lives are worth less simply because they cost less to manage go unchallenged. And if somebody tells you they know what happened that night for sure, ask them to show you the receipt. The story is over in the sense that the facts are on the table and the players have taken their bows or their sentences. The story is not over in the sense that stories never are when they involve people we loved. That is not a contradiction. That is just being human. If you have something to say about what happened here, say it. If you believe violence can be justified by the promise of progress, say that out loud and tell us why. If you believe injustice hides in plain sight behind contracts and committees and euphemisms like asset and collateral, say that too. Make a choice. Take a stand. Use your voice. And when you do, I will be listening.